work ranges from love to cemeteries to what it means to grow old. Filmmaker, multimedia artist, and producer Roberto Mighty joins me to discuss his work, the love of his craft, and what's next for the man who continues to create the stories for diverse audiences. That's coming up next on the PowerPLAY Show.
From the studios at Homemade Productions, this is Season 3 of the PowerPLAY Show. Now, here's Tonya McGrath.
Welcome to the PowerPLAY Show. I'm Tonya McGrath. Roberto Mighty is an award-winning filmmaker, television producer, multimedia artist, educator, and musician. His works include films, residencies, and exhibitions at Harvard University, the National Science Foundation, and film festivals, and is America's first artist in residence at a National Historic Landmark cemetery. Roberto is currently producing and hosting 2 new original series on PBS, World's Greatest Cemeteries, a travel program about history, diversity, and landscape, and Getting Older, a docu-talk program featuring intimate, personal revelations about aging from diverse people who are over 50. Roberto's original historical documentary about Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, Legacy of Love, hosted by Emmy-winning newscaster Liz Walker, is also airing on PBS. Roberto is founder and owner of Celestial Media, a new film, TV, multimedia studio specializing in creative, inclusive content for today's audiences. Mr. Mighty taught cinematography, editing, and video production at Boston University and Emerson College, is a proud dad, plays guitar every day, and needs to get more exercise. Roberto Mighty, welcome to the PowerPLAY Show.
Thank you, Tonya. Thank you for that introduction. And I got to do some sit-ups immediately after this podcast. I ate too much last night again.
Oh my goodness. Listen, I'm so thrilled to have you on. And I am shocked that our paths have not crossed more in the past. I've been in television, filmmaking, producing for about 30 years, and you've been in there a little bit longer than I have. We're both from Boston. We're both Black filmmakers, producers. Yeah. We both have a home at PBS, and we've never connected. Like, what's up with that?
I know, it's just one of those weird things. People get into these strange orbits that are close but not quite touching. Because as you said, you and I have many people in common, right? Mm-hmm. And it's one of those weird things that happens. But we're hanging out now, which is great.
Absolutely. So I know I gave our audience a little bit about yourself, but tell us a little bit more about just what you've been doing in your career and your life and what's going on. I mean, I know it's been a crazy pandemic, so how have things been for you?
Thank you. In an odd way, I know the pandemic of course, has been very tragic for many people, including members of my own family. And, this is just horrible. It's a horrible thing. And hopefully we'll all come through this, sooner rather than later. But I have to say that the pandemic, in an odd way, has been good for people who have the ability to work in their own place, And so I have a home where I built a studio. And so I've got to say that the past couple of years has been one where I've been very productive in my work, because number one, nobody's coming over, and number two, my sweetheart and I are not going out to restaurants, we're not going to friends' houses. So unfortunately, the pandemic has been very good in terms of productivity.
I feel the same way because, a lot of people ask me, and I too built my home studio. I should say my husband built me my home studio.
There you go.
And I've been able to be very creative, and I started production on my second film. So in a weird way, it's allowed me that kind of quietness to really be able to focus on some really incredible stories that I wanted to do. I want to kind of go back to the beginning with you, Roberto. Like, how did you first know that storytelling was something that you wanted to do? And go back as far as you can, because I think this will be really interesting for our audience to hear.
That is a great question, Tonya. I'm so glad you asked that. My parents were my dad was pretty much all business with us kids, me and my brothers and me. My mom, though, was herself a writer, and she wrote short stories and poems, and she was always encouraging that in us. And I got to say, my first little stories and little poems, I mean, 5, 6 years old. So I've been writing since then. And again, all credit goes to my folks, and for the support that I had at every stage of my childhood, and especially my mother, who specifically encouraged me to be creative in writing and also in music. So I was a musician from age 13. So it's been a good run.
Growing up, do you remember like certain movies or television shows that stood out for you and got you thinking like, you know what, I want to do something like this. I want to create something like this one day?
That is a great question. And, it's a funny thing. When I was a little kid, I didn't imagine myself doing television or movies or anything. But I do remember this. I remember that I thought that all the bands and performers that you'd heard on the radio, I thought they were like in the radio studio. And I thought they were like waiting their turn to get up to the microphone one after the other. So as a kid, I thought that radio stations were these vast, massive halls where, again, all these bands and orchestras were just, again, standing in line waiting to get up to get up and say it.
Huge imagination you had. That's a foundation for a good storyteller.
I will say, I think that storytelling is, the first rule of storytelling is being observant, right? And noticing others. And for a variety of reasons, growing up, I always felt like an outsider, wherever we were. My father is from Panama. My mother's from Cincinnati. We spoke 2 languages in the house. And then we also, because my dad was in the Air Force, the family moved around, right? So, I was meeting new people and having to, go into a new school and all that. So in this regard, I think it's not uncommon for people who are outsiders to spend a lot of time looking, sort of observing and seeing, okay, that's the table where if I sit there at lunchtime, they're going to make fun of me, or if I do this, that big kid's going to beat me, whatever it is. So, I think those things had a lot to do with it, feeling like an outsider.
Another thing we have in common, because my dad was in the Air Force as well, and we moved around a lot as a child. So another commonality that we have. Thinking back, what were some of your challenges or obstacles that you can remember as you started to embark on your career or your talents of becoming a storyteller?
So I have to say, I'm so glad you're focusing in on the storytelling, because that's really what we do, right? No matter what kind of equipment we're using, no matter how large the crew is or how small the crew is, in the end, what we're doing is we are telling stories. So I'm sorry, would you ask me that question one more time? I got distracted.
No, of course. So I'm wondering, what kind of obstacles or challenges do you remember coming across or encountering as you started to develop your storytelling, as you started to develop yourself as a storyteller and creator?
Thank you. So one obstacle is one challenge. And when I say what I'm about to say, I'm not fishing for compliments or anything like that, but I was not considered to be attractive as a child, because of colorism, and I don't know how many of your listeners and viewers will be aware of this issue, but within some African descended communities, and in this case, African American communities, being very dark skinned was not a positive factor,
Mm-hmm.
And so as a kid going into puberty, at the time when I was really excited and interested in girls and stuff, my being very dark skinned was not a plus. And also, I happen to be very short in stature. I was always like, when the kids lined up in size places in class, I was always like the first, first one. So I felt that my own appearance was not something which was going to be desirable, as being in front of the camera, let's put it that way. And now a person might say, well, come on, you're 67 now, so what's the big deal? Well, the problem is, though, that these ideas that we have about ourselves are formulated when we are children, right? Yeah. And so in a way that wound up making me a better storyteller, because I felt I didn't have anything except like my wits. Do you know what I mean? Like, that was, yeah. And, the great thing is, when the family moved to Jamaica, Queens, New York, shout out to my homies there. I grew up in a loving community. So living in this wonderful community of, primarily African-American people who had come up from the South, right? There was a lot of love in that community, and there were like 1,000 kids. There's that baby boomer thing where there's like 1,000 children, and we kids would roam free all day. Baby boomers often talk about this, that doors weren't locked. Our mothers would just say, "Okay, be home by dinner," and we kids would just like go all day long and roam the neighborhoods. And in that particular neighborhood out by Kennedy Airport, it was we had a forest, we had a lake, we had a swamp. There's lots of natural things around. And so we kids would play primarily cowboys and Indians. We play army, and we really had a ball all day long. And again, everything was cool until again around puberty, and I began to experience that whatever I had to offer was not, was not valued very much, on that level. But that's okay, So again, I became just more observant, and, it became my business to just see what was happening all around me,
Did you ever think about quitting? Did you ever think about, okay, maybe I don't want to kind of follow something that you had a passion for, which was storytelling, and maybe just do something else where, you didn't have to deal with as many people? And I'm thinking just kind of off the top of my head, like, scientists or, a business person like your dad. Did you think about changing your trajectory back then because of some of the challenges that you were dealing with?
That's a great question. And I have to say again that my folks were very supportive of me. I think that the big thing when I was a kid was, going to college. That was a big deal, in my family. And my family, and also the other people in the neighborhood, they saw me as a kid who was kind of leaning in that direction anyway, so even my cut buddies, my pals, they're like, "Oh man, you're going to college, you don't want to get involved in so-and-so." So they would literally keep me from getting involved in certain kinds of activities.
Good friends.
Yeah, that was really good friends. And we've all found each other on social media. And man, I got to say, I thank them, because there were some, there are always some issues, some things that kids can fall into that's not going to be good for their path, So right. I say the entire neighborhood really sort of united to push me and some other kids, forward in our trajectories.
When you think about when you started and where you are now, what are some lessons you would tell your earlier self?
Oh man, that's a great question. One thing I would tell my earlier self is to be more focused about getting help when you need it. I am a person who likes to just get things done myself. I like to be self-reliant. And sometimes you need help, especially if you don't know what you're doing, and so you need to not just study things out of a book, which I love to do, but you also need to go to someone probably older, with more experience, and ask them for help. So that's something which I wasn't always, Johnny on the spot about doing.
All right, we're going to take a quick break and hear more about his documentary, Legacy of Love, with filmmaker Roberto Mighty. When we continue, you're listening to The PowerPLAY Show.
Before Washington, there was Boston. Legacy of Love tells the story of how Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott met, fell in love, and dreamed a new world together. Legacy of Love reveals how Boston helped set the stage for the iconic civil rights couple of our time.
Now, back to the PowerPLAY Show.
Roberto, I want to talk about some of your more recent projects, starting with Legacy of Love, now airing on PBS stations nationwide. And this is the love story of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther and Coretta Scott King before the Civil Rights Movement. What was so incredible about their love?
What was incredible about their love was how normal it was, thinking about it now. Now, this was before they were famous nationwide. This is 1951, 1952. They were two college students in Boston. And I was a college student in Boston and knew hundreds of others like that. And they were graduate students, so they weren't like 18 years old, okay? They were like, 24, 23 years old. So that's significantly more mature than an 18 or 19-year-old. But still, these are two young people who were introduced by a mutual friend and were just right for each other in many, many ways. And one wonderful thing is that on their first date, King told Coretta that she was just the kind of woman that he wanted to marry.
Wow.
And in her autobiography, she's like, what is wrong with him? Another thing that I thought was fascinating about them was that they were two very good-looking people. I mean, they were very attractive. And I think that this is often overlooked in history, that people, again, we're all human. They were all subject to human drives. And these are two people who were thought, generally speaking, to be quite desirable. King apparently was popular with the ladies even then. And Coretta was thought to, again, be beautiful, was the word used again and again by people that I interviewed, beautiful. Mm-hmm. And, but she held herself kind of aloof. She was deeply focused on her music career. She was a student at the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. And she was deeply focused on that. And also, Coretta was very, very political. She was very left-wing. She believed she was anti-war, anti-nuke. Now, this is 1951, okay? She had very strong political leanings about making the American society more just, working through laws, and then making the world system, the world a more just place. And of course, in particular, she was part of that generation, which was all about uplifting the race, uplifting the African-American race. So she was pretty much, I didn't interview a single person who said, oh yeah, she was into partying. No one said that about Coretta Scott. But they said that about King, that he was very serious about the ministry. I mean, he was very serious about being a role model for his frat brothers. He pledged Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. Mm-hmm. But that he also he was a good dancer, and he sang, apparently. He's liked to sing. And he loved to talk and have a good time with his pals.
We've all seen countless of documentaries or programs that reflect on Dr. King's work, his civil rights work, him being a great orator. And you decided to talk about just the love that he had for this incredible woman. Why was that so interesting to you?
I think it's important to humanize people. So I noticed that when people of my daughter's generation, my daughter's 28 years old, they saw King as King and Coretta Scott King as distant historical figures, like maybe the way that we might see Abraham Lincoln and Booker T. Washington, and I was struck by that because I remember seeing them on television, right? And I remember my own parents were involved in the civil rights movement in various ways. So I remember people coming to the house and talking about the issues of the day. So I felt that it was important to humanize them so that today more people today could relate to them, not just younger people, but also even people who are baby boomer age and above, who might still think of them as being these, literally people carved in stone, So I was fascinated by what were they like before they were famous? Who were these two? And my research, I did, altogether the project took a year and a half, 18 months. And I spent most of that time doing research in various archives and consulting with historians. And I found out what they were like. And it was fascinating. These were two extraordinary young people that they were both leaders, even as teenagers, especially, by the way, Coretta Scott. She was leader of the church choir. She was a part of the political groups and clubs at Antioch College in Ohio, where she did her undergraduate degree. King entered Morehouse College at age 15, and got his. He was an ordained minister by age 19, and he was known to be a leader among his group of friends and his community as well. So these were two. Yes, they're human, but they're also two extraordinary people by the time they met in their early 20s.
The world's greatest cemeteries hold more than mortal remains. They are monuments to landscape, design, horticulture, and history.
It is in fact the 42nd anniversary of the creation of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Season 1 brings us stories about breathtaking burial grounds in London, Paris, Cambridge, Hollywood, Cincinnati, and more.
World's greatest cemeteries. Well, why did this interest you? And I'm just wondering which cemetery in Massachusetts did you profile in this series?
That's great. So from the time we were little kids, my parents met at Wilberforce University in Ohio, which is a traditionally Black university, all right, college, and they always told us. Well, first of all, they were like of that generation where they recited poetry, like just, around the house, and they told us several times that they used to go up to the cemetery near the campus and they would recite poetry up there. And our mother specifically thought that was very, very romantic. So when I was a little kid, I thought that a cemetery was this place where people went to recite poetry. So I did not have this idea of it as a place of mourning or tragedy or anything. I literally thought it was this like a community forum of some kind, and so that was one thing. But my interest in, as an adult, I've done a lot of work in filming landscapes and filming nature. And in particular, my work at Harvard University, I've had an artist residency there, and I've done several projects around the history of landscape and the way that different people, let's say like the Puritan settlers and the Native American hunter-gatherers, use a landscape. And in that landscape, and there's all sorts of things, including cemeteries. And in fact, nowadays, cemeteries remain these massive green spaces, these massive forest preserves in the middle of some of the world's largest cities. As an example, Brooklyn, New York. You think of Brooklyn as a place where all these little buildings scrunched together. Well, there's a 500-acre cemetery in the middle of Brooklyn. I know, right? Exactly, right? And it's stunning. People come from all over the world to check it out. Here in the Boston area, I profiled Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is a National Historic Landmark and one of the top cemeteries in the world for tourism. They get about 250,000 visitors per year. In World's Greatest Cemeteries, I also visit Highgate Cemetery in London. I visit cemeteries and burial grounds in France, Hollywood, of course, Brooklyn, Cincinnati, Ohio, and other parts of this country. And in each case, I go in and I not only look at the cemetery with my cameras and all that, but also interview historians. And I also like to find some interesting individual. Usually, I try to get a mix of people. So I'm sure to get some people of color in there. I'm sure to get women who were extraordinary in history. And just a mix of people who've done very interesting things. So it's like a travel log plus history plus culture.
That's incredible. Mount Auburn Cemetery are where both my grandparents were buried. And so, yes, I like visiting there. It is beautiful. And I know that the tower is not open now, but if you go up to the top of that tower, yes, you get a 360-degree view for miles out. It's absolutely stunning. So if you haven't you have to go to Mount Auburn. Your current project, Getting Older, which taps into questions that I have all the time about what it means to get older.
Financial concerns are definitely more present than in the past.
Because when you're old, you can do anything you want.
The one thing I want to do before I die is spend more than at least 24 hours on each continent on this earth.
But I do think the Beatles had a big influence, I think especially on psychedelics, actually.
How did you come up with this concept, which I think is just fabulous, by the way?
Thank you. So when I was 50 years old, I experienced a little problem with my eyesight, actually a little phenomenon with my eyesight that I thought was a real problem. I thought I was going to go blind. And so I fearfully went to see my doctor. She's like, what are you complaining about? I said, I've got these little things in my eyes. I'm going blind. So she examined me and said, oh, no, this is nothing. These are called floaters. And these are just little bits of tissue that sort of float around the eye. It's not going to hurt your vision at all. And then she said, don't worry, you're just getting older. And at 50, I had not yet experienced that sensation of mortality. I thought, I've been parachuting, I've been, hang gliding, I've done all these things, I swim, and I never broke a bone. And it didn't occur to me that I would get older or be old, and of course I couldn't imagine dying, right? So at that moment, when I contemplated my own, mortality, it occurred to me to wonder if other people had the same sensations of loss and fear and concern that I had. And it was just like that, I went from being invincible to being like, ooh, you're not going to get out of this alive, dude, So I began, that was when I was 50 years old. Then I had other things to do. So about 12 years later, I kept thinking about this idea, and I began asking friends of mine with a camera. Of course, I always have a camera with me. I began asking friends of mine, so how do you feel about getting older? Like, what does getting older mean to you? When you were a kid, what did you want to be and what are you now, and so forth. And so my friends had all sorts of things to say about answers to these questions. And then I quickly realized that this could be a major project for me, because it's something that, again, I love observing people and listening. And it also occurred to me that other people might be interested in this. So I decided in 2014 to expand this project to include actually the entire United States, right? So think big. And also I wanted to be sure to include really all kinds of people. So as of now, as the show is now on public television stations across 200 stations across the country, as of right now, people will see me interviewing folks from Alaska to Puerto Rico. Right? So that's, the far west, the Caribbean is as far east as you can get, right? Of course, the southeast, northwest of continental United States, and all kinds of people, people who are African American, white, Hispanic, Asian, all kinds of religions, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, Jewish, and on and on and on, Native Americans. I just really want to get everybody in on this because we are all aging together.
We are, unfortunately. I feel like I'm getting better, but that's just me. But, you know, one of the questions that I love is when you ask if you could go back in time and counsel your younger self, what are some of the answers that you're getting from your interviews that are sticking out for you?
Wow, that's a great question. And I have to say that some of the people that answer, I mean, some of the answers are really serious. Like, for instance, a woman, one woman said just yesterday that if she could go back in time and counsel her younger self, she would say to leave her abusive husband sooner, you know? And I was like, wow, that is deep. In fact, in general, to all the questions, people speak about losing their child, you know? One woman lost her child to gun violence. You know, child was shot to death. One gentleman's son died of cancer in his arms, 18 years old. So some of these issues are very, very, very heavy. People often speak about, interestingly enough, a lot of women say that if they could go back in time and counsel their younger selves, they would say, don't get married. I don't know what to make of that, right? And because I've not heard a single man say that, not one.
Yeah.
But several women, and I'm talking from every walk of life, you know,
Wow.
every part of the United States. Yep, don't get married, you know. So that's one interesting thing. I ask about intimacy and what it was like, what it is like for people, what it used to be like. Some people report that it's not important to them anymore, you know, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Some people report that they have a great sex life. And some people report that it's something which they wish were happening more frequently. And a lot of them say that. And that's very serious because, you know, we all need a hug, that's for sure, right? We all
absolutely.
Need some loving. But and then there's lots of things that are funny. I get lots of very, very funny answers. You know, people talk about their pets, you know, that people talk about. One gentleman says that, one of my questions is, you know, tell me about your children. And he says, well, my children, they're great, but you know what? They're always doing something that you said not to do. And then you have to go rescue them, you know? And so there's lots of humor. I also, there are people in the series who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And one woman spoke movingly about transitioning into her true female self after being married and having children, right? And that's like, wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Another gentleman, one gentleman, I asked him what it was like being gay growing up in the 60s. I said, that must have been rough. He said, no, it wasn't rough. He said that everyone in the family knew it was no big deal. And that he said when he came out to his sister said, you know, child, Stevie Wonder could have seen that.
That's great. That's great. That's awesome. Well, you know, if you're interested in Roberto's Getting.Older project, you can visit getting.older.com and fill out his 27 questions. I know I'm going to do so this week. It's very, very interesting. We're going to take another quick break, more with filmmaker Roberto Mighty. When we continue, you're listening to The PowerPLAY Show. Hi, I'm Tonya McGrath, producer and director of the upcoming film project, More Than Our Skin. I decided to make this film because I saw a need to let the stories of those living with vitiligo be heard. That it's more than the spots you see. It's the feelings, the depression, the community, and the lives of those impacted by an autoimmune disease with no known cure. More Than Our Skin plans to tell the stories of a diverse cast of people who are willing to share their journeys, many for the first time, as they make positive steps to bring understanding, inclusivity, and acceptance to this widely misunderstood disease. It is my hope that this film will change lives, not just for those with vitiligo, but for the wider audience who will understand once and for all that it's more than our skin. Thank you.
Now, back to the PowerPLAY Show.
As we start to wind down, I wanted to get your perspective on some questions I'm always asked for younger future storytellers. And first, what do you make of the onslaught of so-called journalists, essentially anyone with a smartphone being able to create content, whether fact or fiction, and stream it for the whole world to see? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's danger in letting just anyone, grab a microphone and put it out there. And we see that with disinformation around vaccines, as an example, disinformation about voting and voting rights, voting access, and disinformation and misinformation about medical issues and so forth. And these things are having a negative impact on our country and on our people, and by that I mean all of our people, especially our young people, perhaps. On the other hand, in some ways, the media for many, many years often deferred to traditional establishment power sources. So, for example, I think that as a Black man, I've experienced all sorts of microaggressions and macroaggressions, out there. But I think when people began to actually use their smartphones to videotape encounters with authorities, that's when the country began to say, oh, wait a minute, this stuff really is happening, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So prior to that, all my life, for instance, my father said, don't get smart mouth with the cops. Don't do it, no matter what, right? And then, he would just say, I was like, what is he talking about? And then at some point I encountered a policeman who, with whom, by the way, I wasn't getting lippy with, but he just decided that I was someone that he needed to humiliate and degrade. And fortunately, another police officer down in the station stopped that entire thing from going any further. I'll never forget that. I was literally wearing a suit on my way to a business meeting when this happened, when I was pulled over. And so I just imagining what it's like. Well, let me put it this way. This happened before smartphones. And I could tell people that this incident took place until I was blue in the face, but they say, yeah, okay, whatever, well, yeah, what were you doing, and so forth. So I think the idea that citizens, just can walk around with these phones and videotape encounters, not only with police, but with all kinds of authority, that's important. I think also another thing that's happening is we see, for instance, currently there are waves of violent attacks on Asian women in the streets,
yes,
right around the country.
Yes.
This is an outrage. It's horrible. It's tragic. It's disgusting. But yet, the fact is that when we see it online, we say, oh, wow, that was horrible. That shouldn't have happened. And then it helps to mobilize ordinary people. So the news media can't be everywhere, with our expensive cameras and crews and equipment. So I think that especially the smartphone revolution has been very powerful in terms of bringing out the truth of what's going on in the streets.
I agree. I mean, I tell my kids, I have a 31 and a 27-year-old, and one of the questions they asked me, particularly when the Black Lives Movement really started to become very active several years ago, I said, sweetie, this has been happening all along. The difference is that we have cameras now. Everyone has a camera in their hand now. What advice would you give to upcoming filmmakers or storytellers about their craft and kind of what to expect in this business?
One bit of advice, and by the way, I really enjoy mentoring younger or newer filmmakers. They're not always young, right? And one thing I'd like to say to them is focus on storytelling. And Tonya, I have to say, in this podcast, you began focusing on storytelling from the moment we started talking. That's so important. I see a lot of, especially younger people, focusing on the equipment, focusing on what kind of camera it is, what kind of microphone it is, what kind of software they're using to edit. And I say unto them that if you don't learn to put a story together, no one's going to care how beautiful your pictures are, So now I say that after spending decades, frankly, mastering, cinematography and audio production and all that stuff. But even still, just understanding basic storytelling, understanding the story has a beginning, middle, and end, understanding character development, understanding how we approach a story, from what angle. Like I approached the story of Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King from the romantic angle, and that was fresh, that was unique. So just finding some fresh take on a story, even that other people think they know, all good. So again, I'd say storytelling.
I agree. I also mentor and I say, think of the cameras, the lighting, the audio equipment, that's the seasoning, but you need the meat, and the meat is the story, right?
Great.
So what's next for Roberto Mighty?
Thank you. So these three programs that are now on public television around the country, Legacy of Love, Getting.Older, and World's Greatest Cemeteries, are all doing phenomenally well. In the office here, we're getting tons of fan mail from all over the country, even fan mail from overseas, like no joke. I don't know how they're seeing the stuff, but I've gotten fan letters from England and Argentina and Chile, Ireland, so who knows how they're seeing it. And so there will definitely be season 2, of World's Greatest Cemeteries and Getting.Older. And then, so I'm also developing other spin-offs, a traveling multimedia museum exhibit for each one of those projects. And then also a book for each project that will have some of my photographs, because I'm always taking, photographs wherever I go on these things. And then also some of the testimonies of the people, which are just, frankly, in many cases, heartbreaking, or in some cases, hilarious. Then after that, I'm developing a sitcom about an Afro-Latin family in New York, which of course makes sense, right? And then a feature film about a 19th century historical figure, and then a children's musical animated television series, something that I began working on many, many years ago, and am now pulling. So again, for the next 5 to 7 years, I'm absolutely got more work than I can handle.
Which is not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing.
Roberto, it was so wonderful to connect with you, to speak with you today. And who knows, maybe somewhere in the future we will collaborate on something together. But thank you so much for being a guest today.
My pleasure. It's been terrific being on your show, Tonya.
As I mentioned, you can watch all of Roberto's current projects on PBS, World's Greatest Cemeteries, Getting.Older, and Legacy of Love, all airing now. Please check your local PBS stations for days and times. Remember, you can listen to past episodes of the PowerPLAY Show wherever you subscribe to podcasts, including iTunes, iHeartRadio, Pandora Podcasts, and now Amazon Music. You can also watch our shows on YouTube. Simply search the Hull Bay Productions Media channel and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we air each Saturday at 5 p.m. on BroncoEyeRadio.com. So be sure to tune into a new episode of the PowerPLAY Show each Thursday wherever you subscribe to podcasts, or on our YouTube channel, or simply visit our website, thepowerplayshow.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Tonya McGrath. Keep building and creating.